Chapter 1. The Professor Who Didn't Speak. The first breath Ji-ho drew in Canada that morning tasted of cold air and cedar. It had the stillness he had been chasing all his life, a silence not of suppression, but of peace. The campus of St. Clair University unfolded before him in muted tones of October, maples shedding bronze leaves, glass buildings glinting pale gold. Students hurried past with steaming cups, laughter spilling like wind chimes. To them, he was a new face, another foreign hire in the tech department. To himself, he was the final version of a plan 15 years in the making. He walked with his hands tucked in the pockets of a dark coat, steps measured, expression unreadable. No chauffeur, no entourage, no trace of the soul conglomerate that once dictated his every breath. He had spent half his youth dismantling his father's empire from within, transferring assets, investing under shell companies, planting algorithms that made him a ghost owner in 3 continents. Independence had not been rebellion. It had been survival. And through it all, one name had pulsed quietly beneath the circuits and numbers: Amy. She had been the first person to look at him and not see a ledger, a girl hidden behind the manicured gates of another Chaebol house, her curls tied back, her eyes bright with unspent laughter. He remembered her whispering once, "We're born rich, but raised poor, in everything that matters." Then she was gone. Canada had swallowed her whole. Ji-ho exhaled slowly and entered the faculty building. The smell of new paint and coffee struck him, different from Seoul's sterile boardrooms, but still humming with ambition. He climbed the stairs to the conference hall where the departmental meeting was already underway. Inside, rows of professors clustered around a long table. Someone introduced him. "This is Professor Lee Ji-ho, our new addition from Korea. He'll be handling computational systems." A murmur of welcome, a few polite smiles, and then a voice. Warm, articulate, lilting with traces of Seoul vowels smoothed by years abroad. "If you need any help adjusting to the grading system here, feel free to ask me," the woman said. "I'm Amy Choi." Literature and social development. Time folded in on itself. Ji-ho turned. She stood across the table, sunlight spilling over her hair, highlighting soft brown curls that framed her face. Her skin glowed against a cream blouse, eyes steady but kind, the same eyes that once watched raindrops slide down a practice room window in Gangnam. For a moment, Ji-ho forgot to breathe. 15 years had carved grace into her features, but he saw the same soul, strong, gentle, carrying storms behind a calm smile. He waited for recognition, some spark of memory, but Amy only offered that courteous faculty smile and returned her attention to the agenda. The sound in the room dulled, replaced by the low thrum of his pulse. Ji-ho sat down, hands folded, eyes lowered. It wasn't disappointment that bit at him. It was the realization that the girl who once knew the quietest parts of him now looked through him like any stranger. He told himself it was fair. He had watched her from a distance for years, through news articles, university directories, social media fragments. She had built a career, a life. He had stayed frozen in the moment she left. The dean's voice broke his thoughts. "Professor Lee, you'll be sharing a research cluster with Professor Choi. I think your interdisciplinary work could yield interesting results." Amy looked up. "Of course," she said easily. "Welcome aboard, Professor Lee." Ji-ho inclined his head. "Thank you," he managed, his voice low, almost hoarse from disuse. She smiled, polite again, and jotted a note on her tablet. The meeting stretched another hour. Ji-ho listened more than he spoke, his attention flicking between the projector slides and Amy's handwriting, elegant loops of black ink. When the session ended, chairs scraped and chatter rose around them. Amy lingered, stacking her papers. Ji-ho hesitated, then stepped forward. "It's been a while since I heard a Seoul accent here," he said quietly. She glanced up, pleasantly surprised. "You're from Seoul?" He nodded. "I spent my teenage years there," she said, smiling faintly. "But that feels like another lifetime." Another lifetime. His chest tightened. "Which part?" he asked. "Gangnam." He almost laughed, softly without sound. Small world, he murmured. Maybe. Though I doubt we'd have met back then, she said lightly, unaware of the irony. Jiho's lips curved, a restrained half-smile that could have been agreement. Perhaps not. Amy's eyes studied him for a moment longer, as if catching a thread of familiarity. Then she blinked and looked away. Anyway, welcome again. The students will love you. We've been short on professors who actually know the code behind the theory. I'll try not to disappoint, he said. You won't, she replied, and with that she was gone, heels tapping down the corridor, the scent of vanilla and paper following her like an afterthought. Jiho stood still. For years he had imagined what he would say if they met again. I found you. I never stopped looking. But now, with her so near and memory so distant, words failed him. Selective mutism, the doctors called it, anxiety rooted in trauma. To Jiho, it felt more like his soul had simply learned the futility of speech. Silence had always protected him better than language ever could. He walked out into the courtyard. The air was crisp, the world ordinary. Yet everything in him was unsteady. He passed a group of students laughing by the fountain and caught his reflection in the rippling water. Same sharp cheekbones, same detached gaze. But beneath that calm mask stirred the boy who once waited under rain-heavy clouds for a girl who never came back. He had left Korea to escape the ghosts of his lineage, to live freely under no one's name but his own. But he had come to Canada for one reason only, and now she stood an arm's length away, oblivious. As evening settled, Jiho returned to his apartment overlooking the river, minimalist, silent. He poured tea, opened his laptop, and navigated to the university's faculty page. Her profile photo smiled back at him, confident, professional. He traced the screen with one fingertip, a habit he thought he'd outgrown. Welcome aboard, Professor Lee, he whispered, repeating her earlier words, tasting them like a secret. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. The plan was complete. She was within reach again. Now came the harder part, teaching himself how to speak to her. Chapter 2. The Quiet Between Us. Jiho had always preferred silence to conversation. Silence could be shaped, lengthened, cut short, weighted with meaning. Words could be misused, silence could not. But since that morning's meeting, silence had turned into something else entirely. Memory. The following week, he found himself crossing paths with Amy more often than he intended. Sometimes it was in the faculty lounge, her laughter echoing as she teased a younger lecturer. Sometimes in the hallway, where she balanced coffee and folders with practiced grace. Once he caught her outside after class, crouched by a vending machine, coaxing it to release a stuck bottle for a student. She had not changed. She still cared, the way she always did when no one else in their world ever had. Jiho stopped pretending it was coincidence. He timed his walks to the rhythm of her schedule. He told himself it was harmless, that he simply wanted to learn who she'd become. On a Tuesday afternoon, Amy caught him off guard in the faculty lounge. She was leaning over the coffee machine, muttering softly as it sputtered and refused to pour. Stubborn thing, she said, straightening up. Her eyes met his. You'd think a tech professor could fix this one. The corner of Jiho's mouth twitched. It's a hardware problem, he murmured. No code for broken filters. She blinked, then smiled. A small, genuine thing. Dry humor. I like that. He didn't answer, but the air between them warmed. She handed him a mug. You don't talk much, do you? I talk when it matters. Amy tilted her head as though filing that away. Then I'll have to earn your words. He looked at her then, really looked at her warm honey skin and piercing dark eyes, and in that instant, the past overlapped with the present. Seoul, 15 years ago. The rain had been relentless that day, streaking the tall windows of Daeon Academy. Jiho sat in the practice room, hands hovering above piano keys he had no heart to play. His father had arranged another meeting with the board of the school that morning, reminding him again that sentiment was weakness. Then Amy had appeared, drenched from the downpour, riotous curls sticking to her forehead, clutching a poetry book against her chest. "Are you hiding too?" she'd asked. He hadn't answered. She'd laughed softly, walking in anyway. "Good. I don't like people who talk too much." He had looked up, startled, and she smiled. A small, conspiratorial smile. She sat beside him on the piano bench without invitation, fingers tracing the ivory keys but never pressing. "I heard you play," she said. "It's beautiful, but it sounds sad." "It's practice," he muttered. "It's empty rehearsal," she corrected gently, "and it's missing the passion you have right here." Touching his chest carefully, before squeezing his hand with a merit of meaning that made him allow the contact, reminding him of how deprived he had been of warmth and care. He hadn't known then that one sentence could peel back armor like that. She'd spent the next hour reciting verses from a book her mother once loved, her voice carrying softly over the storm. He hadn't spoken a word, yet somehow she understood every one he didn't say. That day, something wordless and dangerous began. Because what he called deficiency was really longing, and its name was Amy. "Now, Canada," Amy was saying something, breaking through the memory. "So, Professor Lee, rumor says you worked in Seoul's private sector before teaching. Must have been quite the change." Ji-ho stirred his coffee slowly. "The private sector teaches efficiency. Academia teaches patience." She laughed lightly. "That sounds rehearsed." "Maybe it is." She leaned on the counter, studying him, eyes alight with untainted warmth. A window he would pay to stay close to for every season. "You're hard to read." "So I've been told." He meant it as a wall and less as an intrigue, but she smiled as if it were an invitation. "Well, I'll take it as a challenge." You know, the students adore mysterious professors. Keeps them on their toes. Her lightness eased something in him. He allowed the faintest hint of humor into his voice. "I'm not mysterious. Just quiet." "Quiet is good," Amy said. "Quiet people listen." He met her eyes. "It is? I can be a serial killer, and maybe I just listen to hear what I need. Maybe you've heard from the staff how aloof I can be." She seemed momentarily taken aback, then smiled again, softer this time. "You pretend you're uncomplicated, but I don't believe it. Your eyes says different." She frowned and bit her lips, unsure of her observation, or perhaps afraid of overstepping. "I could be wrong, but the silence around you says far more than any words. You're far from simple." Ji-ho's throat tightened. For a fleeting second, he thought she did remember. But the moment passed when a colleague entered, asking her about an upcoming seminar. Amy excused herself, waving goodbye. Ji-ho watched her leave, the echo of her presence and words brushing against the edge of his restraint. That night he returned home and sat at his desk, the same way he had as a boy, studying under his father's shadow. He opened his journal, a habit he'd never broken. The pages were filled with fragments, numbers, stray thoughts. On a clean page he wrote, "Day 8, she remembers nothing, not me. Maybe that's better. The girl I loved is alive, just changed names and worlds. I should be satisfied." He closed the book but didn't believe a word of it. Outside, the river glimmered under city lights. He played an old recording on his laptop, a faint melody of piano and rain. The sound carried him back again. Amy humming beside him, her voice barely audible, but so achingly familiar that even now, after all the years, he could hear it in his bones. 2 days later, Amy invited him to join her class's guest lecture on technology and human empathy. "Your field terrifies my students," she said with a grin. "They think algorithms can't feel." Ji-ho hesitated, but her smile was patient, expectant. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Perfect. It's this Friday." He turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, you said you grew up in Seoul, right? Did you ever know Daehan Academy?" His hand stilled around the papers he was holding. "Yes," he said carefully. "I went there for a few years." She laughed, nostalgic. "Feels strange remembering that place." "It rained all the time." Ji-ho's pulse quickened. "Yes," he murmured. "It did." She smiled at the shared memory of weather, unaware of the weight it held for him. As she walked away, Ji-ho realized the quiet between them had changed. It wasn't the empty kind anymore. It was the kind that hummed with unfinished words. And maybe there was hope. He allowed himself one thought as he watched her disappear around the corner. Maybe silence isn't where we end. Maybe it's where we begin again. Chapter 3. Selective Silence. The lecture hall smelled faintly of rain and printer ink. Ji-ho stood at the front beside Amy, a sea of students shuffling notebooks and tapping screens below them. She smiled as she adjusted the projector, her voice lilting through the room with ease. Today, we're exploring how technology affects empathy. Is human emotion being coded out of our lives, or simply rewritten in a new language? The class leaned in. Ji-ho, meanwhile, watched her profile in the glow of the slides. The rhythm of her speech, the little pause she took before asking a question, was the same as years ago when she'd recited poetry to him. It struck him again how she filled a room not with volume, but with warmth. He'd spoken only 3 words since they'd arrived. Ready when you are. Now she turned toward him. Professor Lee will give us a practical look at emotional data modeling. Dozens of eyes swung his way. Ji-ho's pulse quickened. He began to type on the connected console, pulling up a visualization of neural responses in AI. Lines of code appeared, then morphed into colors and waves. Machines, he said quietly, don't feel. But they can learn the pattern of feeling. He paused, scanning the room. People do the same. It wasn't in his notes. The words had come unfiltered, almost involuntary. Amy looked at him, intrigued. Could you elaborate, Professor Lee? Ji-ho hesitated. The familiar tension clawed at his chest, the one that froze his throat in board meetings, at family dinners, in every moment he'd been told to speak correctly or not at all. He forced a slow breath. We imitate emotion until it becomes real, he said. Empathy is learned repetition, not instinct. Amy smiled. So you're saying connection is a skill, not a gift? Both, he murmured. The students scribbled notes, but Amy kept watching him, her eyes soft with something between curiosity and concern. When the lecture ended, applause rippled through the hall. Amy thanked the class, then turned to him once everyone had gone. You were brilliant, she said, though you looked like you were fighting ghosts the whole time. He blinked. Ghosts? The way you pause before speaking, like every word costs you something. He had no defense for that. Instead, he began packing his laptop. Sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to pry. He shook his head. You're not wrong. Amy's gaze softened. You don't have to talk about it. But you can if you want to. Ji-ho swallowed. Selective mutism, he said quietly. It's not constant. But sometimes, when too many eyes are on me, it feels like trying to breathe underwater. Amy nodded slowly, no pity in her eyes, only understanding. I used to freeze too. When I first came to Canada, I couldn't speak Korean without people staring. Silence felt safer than being misunderstood. Their eyes met, and something old and unspoken passed between them. 2 people who had built fortresses out of quiet. Maybe, she added softly, we both learned the same language. Ji-ho's chest tightened. Silence? Survival, she corrected gently. He looked away before his composure fractured. That evening, Amy knocked on his office door. He hadn't expected her. The sun had set, painting the windows in violet shadows. She stepped in holding 2 mugs. Coffee truce, she said with a grin. Mine was terrible, so I made a better batch in the staff kitchen. He accepted the mug, the warmth bleeding into his hands. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She sat across from him, looking around the bare room. No photos, no plants, just a desk and computer. You really live like an algorithm, don't you? He allowed a faint smile. Minimal variables. Control freak. He raised an eyebrow. Accurate. Amy laughed. At least you're self-aware. The laughter softened into quiet. She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching, as though some invisible thread was tugging at memory. You remind me of someone, she murmured. From Seoul. We were kids, but he was quiet too. Brilliant, always planning something. Ji-ho's pulse stilled. What happened to him? He disappeared, she said. I thought he didn't care enough to say goodbye. He wanted to tell her he had tried, that he'd gone to her house the night she left and been turned away by guards, that he'd waited in the rain until dawn, but the words snagged in his throat, unspoken for so long they had calcified. Instead, he said, "Maybe he cared more than you think." Amy smiled faintly, eyes distant. Maybe. But that's the thing about the past. It keeps its secrets. They drank their coffee in silence. Ji-ho watched her fingers circle the rim of her cup, the same nervous habit she used to have before reading poetry aloud. She caught him watching and tilted her head. "What?" "You still do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "That," he gestured slightly, "with your hands." Her brow furrowed. "How would you—" A knock on the door cut her off. A student peeked in, asking about a grading form. Amy stood, promising to talk later. As she left, she shot him a look, half curious, half unsettled. When the door clicked shut, Ji-ho let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He opened his laptop again, pretending to work, but his mind replayed her words. "You remind me of someone." That night, sleep refused him. He walked to the balcony, the river whispering below, moonlight catching on the glass towers. His phone buzzed with a message, an old business contact in Seoul sending quarterly figures. He ignored it. Those numbers belonged to another life. He wrote a new line in his journal instead. Amy remembers pieces. Maybe silence wasn't protection. It was distance. Maybe I'm the one who made her forget. He closed the book. A low hum of thunder rolled across the sky, rain on its way. He smiled faintly, the first since the day they'd met again. For the first time in years, the silence in him didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like anticipation. Chapter 4. The Weight of Memory. The storm arrived at dusk, dragging the city into a wash of gray. Wind rattled the windows of the faculty lounge as Amy slipped inside, shaking rain from her coat. She had stayed late grading essays, the kind that left her both proud and tired, each paper a tiny window into how people tried to understand one another. When she noticed light under Ji-ho's office door, she hesitated. It was nearly 9. Most staff had gone home. Still, something in her, an instinct she never ignored, told her to check. She knocked once. "Come in," came the quiet reply. Ji-ho sat at his desk, lit by a single lamp. Rain streaked the glass behind him like brush strokes. He looked up, and his expression softened slightly. "You're still here," she said. "So are you." Amy smiled. "Touché." She stepped closer, placing a folder on his desk. "I printed feedback from the lecture. The students loved it." One wrote, "Professor Lee sounds like he's explaining the universe in code." Another said you made empathy sound scientific but beautiful. He blinked, almost embarrassed. "Beautiful?" Amy nodded. "Apparently you have a fan club already." He looked away, muttering, "They'll be disappointed once I start grading." Her laugh filled the room, soft but rich. "You should give yourself credit, Ji-ho. You have a way of making complexity feel human." His gaze lifted at her use of his first name. She hadn't even noticed she'd said it. It came naturally, the way her kindness always did. Unforced. She perched on the edge of his desk. "Can I ask something personal?" He tensed but nodded. "Why teach?" "You don't seem like someone who needs to. Your resume reads like a man who's already conquered half the tech world." Ji-ho considered his answer carefully. "I got tired of building things that replaced people. Teaching keeps me close to the part of humanity that still learns." Amy studied him, impressed. "That's surprisingly poetic." "I'm an efficient poet," he said dryly. She laughed again, shaking her head. "You're impossible to figure out." "And you're trying?" "Of course. It's my job to read people. Literature, remember?" He smiled faintly. "Then what do you read in me?" Amy folded her arms, thinking. Discipline, control, maybe too much of both. And underneath, she paused, searching his face. Someone who's carrying something heavy. You hide it well, but you haven't put it down. Her words were gentle, not probing, an observation, not a demand. Ji-ho's fingers stilled on his keyboard. For a moment, he felt 16 again, cornered by a girl who saw through him like glass. He swallowed. You sound sure. Amy tilted her head. I'm used to people performing. You don't perform? You withdraw. There's a difference. The rain outside thickened, drumming steady. Amy watched it for a while before speaking again. You know, when I first moved here, I didn't speak to anyone for months. People thought I was shy, but really, I was just tired of being misunderstood. Every word was like walking on glass. Jiho listened, silent but intent. My father used to say feelings were distractions, she went on. That crying was a luxury. Maybe that's why I teach empathy. To prove him wrong, maybe to prove me right. She smiled, self-deprecating. Sorry, I'm rambling. Don't, he said quietly. Please. Amy met his gaze, startled by the plea in his voice. Something about him in that moment, his calm unraveling just slightly, made her chest ache. All right, she said softly, then I'll keep talking. She told him about her students, about the girl who wrote poetry in binary, about the boy too nervous to read aloud until she played music for him. As she spoke, Jiho watched her hands, graceful even in simple gestures. Her words moved through the room like the rain, steady, cleansing. For the first time in years, he felt the noise in his head quiet. When she finally stood to leave, the storm had softened to a mist. Thank you for listening, Amy said, gathering her folder. It's rare to find someone who actually does, and ever rarer for feel comfortable to open up to. You make it easy, he replied before he could stop himself. She smiled, genuine and warm. Careful, Professor Lee. That almost sounded like a compliment. Almost, he said, and she laughed all the way out the door. Later that night, Jiho dreamed of rain again, but this time Seoul was in it. He was 17, standing outside the Choi estate gates. The guards refused to open them. He remembered shouting her name once, then losing his voice to the downpour. He'd stood there until dawn, soaked and shaking, a silent promise buried under the sound of tires on wet pavement. He woke before morning, chest tight. The echo of her laughter still lingered from hours ago. He sat up, opened his journal, key, and wrote, She carries her past like sunlight, warm, never blinding. I carry mine like shadow. Maybe that's why I can't stop orbiting her. He closed the book as the first light crept through the blinds. The next day, Amy arrived early for class. She loved the hush before students filled the hall, the smell of paper, the hum of old lights. When Jiho appeared at the door, she smiled automatically. You're early too, she said. Old habits. She nodded. Control freak. He almost smiled. You remember? Hard to forget. Their eyes held a moment too long before students began to pour in. Amy turned back to the board, hiding a faint blush she couldn't explain. As class began, she caught herself glancing at him. Something about the way he listened, focused, quiet but not detached, made her feel seen in a way that unnerved her. When the lesson ended, one of the students approached her. Professor Choi, the girl said. Professor Lee doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's like he's been listening the whole time. Amy smiled. He always is. That's an attractive quality, no? As she watched Jiho pack his laptop, she realized she meant it. She didn't know why he felt so familiar or why every conversation with him left a strange ache in her chest, but she knew he carried depth like gravity. And somewhere inside, beneath her calm and logic, she wanted to know every layer of it. Chapter 5, Recognition. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt damp with memory. Jiho arrived before sunrise, slipping into the lab where he often worked when sleep refused to stay. The hum of the monitors soothed him constant, predictable, unlike the way his thoughts kept drifting toward Amy. Everything about her from the night before still looped in his head. Every smile of hers seemed to spark something inside him, a pattern he wanted to understand, a code that refused to be cracked. He set a small cup of coffee on the desk beside her lecture notes, double sugar, no milk. He'd remembered from the one time she'd accidentally swapped their mugs and made a face at his bitter espresso. Now it was habit. Every morning she found it waiting, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, always there. She'd assumed it was the janitor. He never corrected her. It wasn't grand, but it was how he knew to care. Quietly. Consistently. He turned back to the prototype on his desk, a compact AI companion designed to assist with sensory feedback and emotional regulation. Most would think of it as a teaching aid, but to him it was something else. The program had Amy's cadence, her tonal patterns, her pauses between thoughts not copied but inspired. He told himself it was for research. He knew it wasn't. The device glowed softly as he tested the sound recognition module. When her recorded voice came through, faintly humming the melody she'd mentioned in class, the one she said her grandmother used to sing in Seoul, Ji-ho froze. His pulse stumbled. He hadn't heard that song since before. Before the fire. Before the name Min-soo had become a ghost he buried. He leaned back, fingers trembling slightly, the memory forming like mist. Amy at 16, standing under a cherry tree, shyly humming the same tune when she thought no one was listening. It wasn't possible. Was it? By mid-morning, the faculty lounge was alive with chatter. Amy sat by the window, reading student drafts, when the faint hum of that same melody drifted from the hallway. Her pen stopped mid-sentence. She knew that sound. The exact tone, the same halting rise at the third note. It was the song she'd only ever shared with one person, a boy she'd once known, whose name she hadn't said in years. Her heart began to thrum. When Ji-ho entered, holding 2 coffees, she looked up too quickly. "Morning," he said easily, placing 1 cup beside her. "Morning," she replied, voice thinner than she wanted. You hummed something just now." He stilled, mask almost slipping. "Did I?" "Yes. It sounded like..." She trailed off, eyes narrowing slightly. "Never mind. Just familiar?" He forced a smile. "Coincidence, maybe." "Maybe," she echoed, though something deep inside whispered otherwise. She studied him as he worked the meticulous way his hands moved, how he double-checked every file, how he seemed to carry the world like a fragile thing he refused to drop. There was a gentleness in him she'd overlooked at first, in how he made space for silence, how he never interrupted, how he noticed the smallest discomfort and quietly fixed it before she even mentioned it. Last week, she'd complained the office chair squeaked. The next morning, it didn't. Her pen had broken mid-lecture 2 days later. A new one appeared in her drawer, the same brand and color. It was his way. Practical kindness disguised as logic. Amy bit her lip, an involuntary smile rising. She'd known men who spoke endlessly of love but offered nothing tangible. Ji-ho was the opposite. Every act, no matter how small, seemed deliberate, coded in care. And it scared her how much it mattered. That evening, she found him still in the lab, the soft blue of the monitors painting his face in tired light. "You haven't gone home?" she asked. "Neither of you." "You got me there," she said, smiling faintly. She noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "You need rest, Ji-ho." He shook his head. "I'm close to finishing something." "What is it?" He hesitated before turning the device toward her. A small screen lit up with swirling lines of sound patterns. It's designed to help recognize emotional resonance, to teach empathy through sound. Amy leaned closer, fascinated. "You made this?" "It's still learning." "Like us," she murmured. He looked up, caught off guard by how softly she'd said it. "Play it," she said. He pressed a key. The melody emerged, her grandmother's tune, perfectly clear, perfectly wrong, because it carried the faintest tremor, the same tremor from that boy's version, the one who used to wait for her after class, who'd written her name into every song he played. Amy's breath hitched. "Where did you hear that?" Ji-ho didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, unguarded and affectionate, and the years between them collapsed. She whispered, "Min-soo?" He closed his eyes and swallowed. "You remembered." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred, the kind that held every word they didn't need to say. Amy's vision blurred with unshed tears. "You disappeared. Everyone said you..." "I know," he said softly. "The fire. I should have been there. Tried harder, but I thought I thought it would hurt you more if I tried to reach you. It hurt anyway, she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice barely above the hum of the machine. I thought if I rebuilt myself, if I could fix the world that failed us, maybe I could deserve to see you again. Her heart broke and mended in the same breath. You always tried to fix everything, she said, smiling through tears. Even the things that weren't broken, that aren't yours to fix. Ji-ho reached out, brushing his thumb against her wrist, tentative, reverent, like she might vanish again. I don't know how to stop, he admitted. Then don't, she said softly. Just let me help you carry it this time. He exhaled a sound somewhere between a sigh and a release, and for the first time in years, he let himself smile, exposing her to the man who held her in such high regards. Later, as they stood by the lab window, the city glittered in the distance, reflected in the glass like twin stars. Amy leaned her head against his shoulder. You built a machine that can feel, she said quietly. But I think you've been teaching me more about what it means to understand. He turned slightly, his voice gentle. You're the reason I remembered how. She smiled, eyes closing. You always were. Chapter 6. The Heart Remembers. The first snow of the year drifted past the wide university windows, settling on the ledges like pale ash. Ji-ho stood there for a long while, one hand around a cup of tea gone cold, watching the flakes dissolve against the glass. The city hummed beneath him, streetcars sighing, students laughing somewhere in the courtyard, yet his world felt still, almost suspended. For the first time since leaving Seoul, he wasn't running from anything. The storm inside him had begun to quiet, and the reason was the woman sitting at his desk, grading papers with an expression of complete, calm focus. Amy looked up, smiling softly. You've been staring out there for 10 minutes. Are you coding the snowfall again? He huffed a quiet laugh. No, just memorizing it? You really don't forget anything, do you? He walked toward her, setting the untouched tea beside her elbow. Only the things I want to keep. She raised a brow. That makes no sense. It does to me. Amy shook her head, the corner of her mouth curving. You're impossible. And you stayed, he said simply. The words silenced the room. Amy's gaze softened. She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. You make it sound like that's something difficult. For me, it's rare, he admitted. People usually leave first. Then they were foolish. He looked down at her hand resting lightly over his pulse. The warmth of her skin anchored him more firmly than any company, any fortune, any invention ever had. Everything he'd built, the algorithms, the encrypted networks, the discrete foundations that funded underprivileged students, had been ways to control what hurt. Amy somehow was teaching him how to feel instead. That night, he took her to his apartment for the first time. The space was minimalist, yet strangely alive walls lined with prototype sketches, soft light strung across metal shelves. In one corner stood a small 3D printer quietly forming something. Amy tilted her head. What are you making? He hesitated before answering. A memory keeper. It's an integrated module that stores moments, voice, light, ambient sound. I started designing it after I found you again. For me? She asked, incredulous. For us, he corrected, for when silence feels too loud again. She touched the machine's frame gently. Ji-ho, you could sell something like this for millions. He smiled faintly. Not everything needs to make money. Amy met his gaze, eyes bright with something between admiration and affection. You really don't know how remarkable you are. He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. I know what it's like to build things to fill the emptiness. You taught me how to fill it differently. The days that followed unfolded in small, tender gestures. They still kept professional boundaries at work, though colleagues whispered about their quiet closeness. Ji-ho never confirmed or denied anything. He simply walked her to her car each evening, umbrella tilted slightly toward her side when it rained. When Amy fell ill with the flu, he appeared at her door without warning, holding a bag of ginger tea, medicine, and a tiny device that projected the sound of ocean waves across her ceiling. Sleep is better with rhythm, he murmured when she blinked at the soft light dancing above them. She wanted to protest, but the comfort of his presence made it impossible. Through her haze, she whispered, "You watch over people the way others breathe." His smile was a whisper itself. Only you. Weeks later, the snow thickened. One evening after lectures, Amy found him in the courtyard, adjusting a small sensor near the benches. "Another project?" she teased. He looked up, the faintest grin ghosting his lips. "A light installation. It reacts to footsteps, so people walking alone at night don't feel unseen." Her chest tightened. "You're incredible, Ji-ho." He straightened, brushing snow from his coat. "It's nothing." "It's everything," she said, voice trembling. "You keep fixing the world in these gentle ways. And you think no one notices." He hesitated, then quietly, "You noticed." Amy stepped closer, slipping her gloved hands into his. "How could I not?" He exhaled, and the cloud of his breath mingled with hers in the cold air. For once, no ghosts of soul stood between them. Just two people, finally learning the same language care, spoken in silence. Spring came late that year, hesitant and shy. On the morning of the faculty retreat, Ji-ho walked into the lounge to find Amy holding a small box wrapped in paper, the color of cherry blossoms. "For you," she said. He opened it carefully. Inside was a silver keychain, a miniature of his memory keeper, engraved with words in both Hangul and English. "Remember how far you came." He looked at her, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You remembered. I learned from the best." That evening, they walked home beneath the thawing branches. The streets were slick with melting snow, puddles catching the last of the light. Ji-ho slipped his hand into hers, fingers threading easily, naturally, like a pattern finally completed. "Do you ever regret leaving Korea?" she asked. He considered it. "I regret not finding you sooner. Everything else was necessary." Amy smiled, squeezing his hand. "Then I guess we're exactly where we're supposed to be." He stopped walking, turning to her fully. "You're my home, Amy." Her breath caught. "Say that again." He did quietly, the words carrying more truth than any promise. She reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his face. "Then welcome home, Ji-ho." And when she leaned into him, it wasn't the desperate reunion of lost souls, but the steady, certain closeness of two people who had finally learned that love, real love, is not built from chaos, but from the quiet decision to stay. Above them, the last traces of winter slipped away, and for the first time in years, Ji-ho let the world in.